Off top in 1995, Pat Riley kind of traded for himself. Play the music.
This is the Domonique Foxworth Show.
All right, welcome to the Domonique Foxworth Show. I'm here with Charlie as I always am, but we got a little bit of a unique. What? Did I offend you? I should have sold it more. You look sad.
I want to know how you cut off before we got to know how Pat Riley traded for himself. It's very rare that I don't have the background on your off tops, and then you can't breeze past it when I'm genuinely interested.
I think that before we get back to that, if we get back to it, maybe I'll make you go Google it yourself. I think that I need to remind people that you're here, my co-host, and we have a special guest, the professor himself, Mr. Bobby Marks, the NBA insider expert that we have at ESPN, and now teaching all these young people how to manipulate the cap and and get the best players that you can into your organization, right, Bobby?
Well, Charlie, if you didn't know this before, I also traded a head coach back in 2014. It was actually the last coach that was traded was Jason Kidd to the Milwaukee Bucks for two future second round picks. I don't know what happened to those second round picks, but yes, that was I believe that was the last coach that was actually traded under this under the collective bargaining agreement.
At least you know it wasn't for Nikola Jokic, because there would be so many stories written in like NBA Red saying Jason Kidd as a coach was traded for Jokic or any second round, or Jalen Brunson, one of those.
A real funny story before we get going here. We the second night of the draft, I was on stage with Bob Myers, the former longtime executive of Golden State, and we were talking about trades. And Malika likes to tease me a lot about like all my bad trades that happened, and so she said to him, like, tell him about the trade for Draymond. And Bob's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, well, that in 2010, we traded you Troy Murphy because we were trying to get off his money, and we threw in a future second, and that future second turned into Draymond Green. So you got to be careful when you're trading those future seconds there.
As a third round pick, which that doesn't even exist in basketball, I think that's where you find the best players late in the draft.
Yeah.
Three and above. Anyway, Charlie, the Pat Riley situation was he stepped down from the Knicks job and was obviously planning to take the Heat job, but the Knicks still owned his rights. So they filed a tampering complaint against the Heat, and Pat Riley, he didn't sign with the Heat until afterwards, but he sent over some compensation. They dropped the tampering claim. So effectively, he traded for himself. That's the off top.
That does seem like tampering.
All right, buddy, where do you want to start?
Okay, so yeah, we, about a month ago, we did an episode on the second apron where we were talking about the unintended consequences and how that we thought that the CBA had going from bird rights to max contracts to super max contracts, splintering off the decision, actually was a really good storytelling mechanism for how we've had teams built, champions falling, and this news cycle that we have in the NBA where it seems like we have a dynasty today and then tomorrow it's something different. That seems very specific to what's happening now. We just had an off season where before free agency, John Hollinger wrote a story about, is free agency dead? Or dead as we know it, because the second apron changes things and guys are signing and being traded at a much higher rate than they were when it was, the free agency of 15 years ago with LeBron James and everything that came out of it. So the first thing I want to ask is, Bobby, you're pretty plugged in with the league circles and the GMs. Do you get the sense, because we hear so much about it from the perspective of how it restricts players, but do you get the sense that GMs like the second apron and all the complexities that come with it?
Well, I think the GMs that like their roster likes the second apron because what it does is that it basically forces you to if you love your roster, it gives you more of the resources to be able to retain your own players. Draymond Green had made a comment, that the second apron basically ruined free agency, and there's a fact and there's a fiction to that claim. I would say what's limited free agency is the ability that you can negotiate with your own players right after the finals are over. That was never the case before, and that's why we saw Kyrie Irving and James Harden and Naz Reid and Julius Randle, like all these free agents basically agree to deals before we even got to June 30th. And then the ability to extend your own players. Like this summer was supposed to be like this all-star level free agent class of all these big heavy hitters, Giannis and Lillard, and it was like, there was like everybody, AD, I mean, Jason Tatum. And then what happened is that the league came in and said, well, we're going to give teams the more flexibility to be able to go out and retain your own players and sign them to extensions. And now we're, I think, compared to the last CBA, we're like a +7 in veteran extensions, and the same with rookie extensions. I think we've had, since this CBA's come in, we've had like 36 rookie extensions, 14 in one season a couple years ago. So there are, if you love your roster, so if you're Oklahoma City, and it's funny because like when they signed Shea, Jalen Williams, and Chet Holmgren to these extensions, people are like, oh, here it comes. The second apron is going to take this team down. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like, maybe down the road, but not with those players because they have so many of the resources in-house already. Like, they love their roster, right? Like, they've got, like, Keith and Wallace and all these young players.
It's funny to me that you say that the second apron kind of allows you more flexibility to keep the roster if you like the roster you have. Yes. Because it feels like part of at least the early story about the second apron is about these kind of forced salary dumps that happen with like the Celtics and that we see on the horizon for some other teams.
Well, and here's what happened. So the rules, the CBA started in 2023. The second apron rules did not start until 2024 offseason. The league told teams, we're going to give you a year to get your finances in order. There's going to be a phase-in period here. And what happened was some teams did, but then Boston, Milwaukee, Phoenix, and the Clippers. They said,
Phoenix really stands out there.
Yeah, and they said, you know what? We're going to do the reverse opposite. Yeah. And I equated it to like, if you knew the buffet was closing at midnight and you get there at 11:30 and you're like, I'm going to eat as much as I can in the next 30 minutes. Like, so what those teams did was, and there's a correlation to what they did in the 2023 offseason to what we just saw the last month. They went out and traded for Damian Lillard in Milwaukee. Right. They went out and traded for Kristaps Porzingis, Drew Holiday in Boston. They went out and got Kevin Durant in that February before the rules started. Bradley Beal, like James Harden, right? Like all these. And you know what? The only guy left on the roster is James Harden in the Clippers. All those players have either been traded or bought out of their deals. And because it is that, and that's why, like, it's funny. I did an interview in Cleveland on radio, and they're like, oh my God, the second apron is going to break up this Cavaliers team. It's all homegrown players. And I'm like, wait a minute, Donovan Mitchell was in a trade and Jared Allen was in a trade. And Evan Mobley is a homegrown product. But that's what the league had said in 23 is like, get your finances in order. Those four teams did the reverse. And Paul George went somewhere else last year. And there's like the unintended consequences to that.
Oh, unintended consequences. You're speaking our language.
So I have so many follow-ups after you go, Domonique.
Okay, I'll hold your horses for 1 second.
I know,
but I guess I assume that we are going to continue to have this cycle happen. And we kind of theorized that we would be in a bit of a quickie era for basketball because like the incentives are still there to blow way over the cap in order to maximize your talent to win a championship. But there's no way to phase out of that without a complete like roster purge. So while these teams did go all in now, there's no reason to believe that other teams won't do the same thing because the penalty comes by being way over the luxury tax multiple times, not just for a championship run.
Yeah, I mean the luxury tax used to be the boogeyman, right? When I was in Brooklyn, we were like the first team that actually blew through it and were paid like $100 million 1 year. I think our payroll was like 90 and our luxury tax was like 100. And people were like,
good job. Pay the players, baby. Pay the players. I love it, Bobby. You're a good man.
I know, and they're like, everyone was like, "Oh my God, $200 million!" And nowadays, like, you can going over to luxury tax is not as bad. The second apron level is what teams are is really what teams are trying to avoid. And you've seen it before. Like Minnesota, Tim Connolly, who's their president in Minnesota, he's like, we can do it for a year. Like we can be a second apron team. When you get to that second year and your third year and you lose in the conference finals or maybe the second round, then it basically it makes you pause and say, all right, is this window with this core group, can we win at a high level? Or do we kind of like, maybe instead of 4 out of the players, we're going to pick 2 out of those 4 players. There is the loophole of getting around the second apron. And I think the league did not realize teams were going to take advantage of is the stretch provision that we saw this summer. So there's 2 different ways to look at it, right? There's a way to look at it what Milwaukee did, right? And they basically said, hey, we've got no more resources to go out and get talent to add around Giannis anymore. But Damian Lillard is going to be out for the rest of the year. And we're going to take his $113 million and we're going to stretch it over 5. And instead of paying him 50, we're going to pay him 20. And that $30 million gives us the flexibility to go get Miles Turner. Or you can see what Phoenix did. I mean, Phoenix was buried in the second apron. They were a second apron team for a second consecutive year. Their pick was going to get frozen and all these things that they didn't have available to add to their roster, trades, free agency. And they said, well, Bradley Beal, let's see if we can do a buyout with Bradley Beal. And by doing that, they basically took $96 million and stretched it over 5 years. And now, guess what? They are no longer a first or second apron team.
Sorry, Dominique, I have to hop in on this because that's one of the things I don't remember this. I feel like the buyout market, I should say this way, was always overhyped coming into this. It was after the trade deadline, and you'd see like a LeBron Cavs team bring in Darren Williams, like famously, or Andrew Bogut, or something like that. And it was big names that weren't actually impactful. And I wonder if one of the unintended consequences of this is we're actually seeing a buyout market where you're seeing guys, they're not actually losing money. Like Bradley Beal's, he didn't lose a dime with what he signed with the Clippers for, if I'm not mistaken. He just made it up in that it was just minus
make it up over 2 years, basically.
Yeah, over 2 years. Is one of the unintended consequences that teams are going to be able to, and particularly these big market teams, are going to end up with guys who are bought out because, like you said, it was a buffet that's closing and you can't take it with you. Yeah. And so the Suns had this gas station sushi that they're just putting outside in the casino, being like, can't take it with us. And maybe that gets fixed up by another team. But are we going to see the buyout market be a secondary source for teams building in a way that it hasn't been in years past, and not just after the trade deadline, but at the beginning of every summer?
Yeah, well, here's a rule that the league is really good about, basically trying to button up all these different rules. We get when the trade deadline happens in February, we get like crazy, like, oh, the second trade season's happened, and then all of a sudden there's like really nobody out there from a buyout perspective. Because here's why. Once the regular season starts, if you are a first or second apron team, you are not allowed to sign a player who is waived and had a pre-existing contract of $14 million. Mm-hmm. Okay? But guess what? During the offseason, those rules don't apply. So that's why we heard a lot about LeBron. Like, would LeBron ever take a buyout and go back to Cleveland? And like, yeah, well, this is the window when they can do it, because once the regular season starts, they're not able to do it. And that's why Bradley Beal, DeAndre Ayton, Marcus Smart, all these players that have been bought out, which we would normally see maybe in February or early, end of February, all of a sudden are being bought out of their contracts in July. And it gives teams potentially who could be apron teams the ability to go out and sign them. So we basically have reversed the script a little bit here. And the buyout market really now is in July instead of it used to be in February.
Just on the counterpart of this too, where you talked about teams that were in apron hell, I do want to, and you said the teams had 2 years to get this in order, I guess a year and a half really to get this in order, their finances in order. The follow-up I wanted to, is, did Oklahoma City have an unfair advantage in this? Like, if you were GMing Brooklyn still and you're looking at this being like, yeah, they had a year to get it in order, but the fact that their 5-year plan from 2020 on, when they traded Paul George for all those picks, and then they were able to be a way station for bad contracts before the second apron era, it seems like now that this has started being punitive for other teams, they're in a unique position where they can continue to add talent on the cheap and retain the talent they want. And that gives them a significant leg up compared to other teams who might be building for shorter windows.
Well, if Oklahoma City was a marathon runner, they basically were allowed to start at mile marker 10, and everybody else was like, okay, let's start from the beginning. And like they played by the rules, and
Hmm.
I mean, listen, they went through 2 years where they won like a combined like 45, 46 games. Like they were really bad. But when you look at how they've been able to do things, how they've structured their books, right? Like all their contracts of not their big guys, but Hartenstein and Wiggins and Kenrick Williams and AJ Mitchell, they all either decline, they've got team options. They're basically, Lou Dort also gives them the flexibility to get out of those contracts or maybe get them at a lower number if they want to. The draft picks, of course, when we look at, I mean, listen, they got 13 future first in the next 7 years. And what happens is when Lou Dort becomes expensive, they're like, okay, we're going to have that Philadelphia pick in 2026 that can potentially replace him, or a player like Case and Wallace. The most impactful thing with Oklahoma City is that they've got Shea on this. His supermax doesn't start until 2 years from now. He's
Wow.
actually playing below a max contract for the next 2 years. He's playing at like 22% of the salary cap, which is a remarkable thing. The max for there's three different maxes, 25, 30, and 35. He's actually playing it because the salary cap has grown. And then you look at what they've done with their two rookies that on rookie extensions with Jalen Williams and Chet. You can negotiate what we call an escalator clause in their contracts where you can bump it up to 30% of the max if they earn like MVP, defensive player of the year, first or second or third team All NBA. Like Evan Mobley did that in Cleveland,
Yeah.
and Cleveland paid the price because Evan Mobley's contract went from like 38 million to like 46 million because he was named defensive player of the year. Well, guess what they did in Oklahoma City? Chet Holmgren didn't get any of those escalator clauses in there. Jalen Williams got only if it's MVP, first team, and defensive player of the year, it's 30%. Everything else is at a lower number. So even if those players exceed or play at a high level, they're not going to pay the penalty like other teams have in the past.
How general managers always, I mean, that was always a weird thing in previous contract or previous CBAs that like your accolades, you want to celebrate them and you want to encourage them, but they then make it tougher for you to win a championship. How have general managers felt about that?
That's if you there's two things that if you talk to teams about regarding this CBA, and this is a rule that's been in the past, but it hasn't been as impactful because we never had a second apron, right? We never had that threshold where teams don't want to exceed. That's one of the rules that teams were like, wait a minute, that's why we're getting penalized because we drafted well and our player earns defensive player of the year, and now it's going to cost us an additional 45 million. Yes, maybe 45 million towards the player, but why should it count against the cap in that perspective? And then the other thing too is and we saw this, there's a crazy trend. There's a trend where players who sign free agent contracts get bonuses in their contract. And sometimes it's a perk to the player where RJ Barrett, for example, 3 or 4 years ago, signed a contract and he has like $4 million in bonuses in there. And they're like throwaway bonuses, right? They're like MVP, defensive player, like stuff that he wouldn't probably get. But they said, you know what? We're going to give you $3 to $4 million bonus instead of your contract at 120 million. It's going to be reported at 140. What's happened is that bonuses, and that contract was signed before the CBA started. Bonuses count towards the apron, if you get them or you don't. So
Wow.
So they count. Tyler Hero is another example. They count towards the apron, even if that player does not earn that bonus during the season. So what teams are saying, well, wait a minute, like we signed these guys before this new CBA. Shouldn't we get like a reprieve or a grace period? And the league said no. So yes, that rule and the rule with the escalator clause are the two things that really stand out with teams.
That's so interesting. It's also like, sorry, this just came to me as we were talking about this, but like so much of this has been made that the league has done this for parity. But from your perspective, is this actually going to create parity if it's harder for other teams to improve while there are certain teams, whether it's a Cleveland or a Houston or Oklahoma City, who are set? In certain ways, doesn't that just settle things where they are?
Well, I mean, we're always going to have it's if we're trying to get NFL parity, I would say, I think we're going to probably it's going to be an uphill battle. I don't,
Right.
because they're always going to have. Because what happens is that what teams, which is different than the NFL, is like teams are already lining up to 2026 draft, right? They're like, wait a minute, like Darren Peterson and the Boozer twins and AJ DeBanza, like we would really like him in Utah and Washington, right? Like you already see teams like kind of lining up, whether it be the Wizards buying out Marcus Smart or Utah trading John Collins or some of these other teams. So from a parity standpoint, I don't think we'll ever get there because the draft incentivizes teams to lose, right? Like that's the reality of it. And they've tried to do a better job. And we saw Dallas go from 11th to the number 1 pick. But we're already in August right now, and I can already tell you who the probably 10 lottery teams are going to be, right? Like I can say Brooklyn and Utah and the Wizards, and and that's why you want to give Portland credit, right? Like Portland goes out and gets Drew Holiday, and then they go out and Lillard's not going to play until next year, but they've made some moves and they're trying to get better, and it's like, okay, that's great. I want to give you credit, but I don't know if it's going to be good enough to get you into the top 10 of the Western Conference. So that's the hard part when you look at Yeah.
I mean, I just generally hate that about the way that the NBA is structured is that like we have so many fans who are informed on basketball, informed enough to know that they are upset when their team is not being as bad as possible. Like I host a show with one who's upset.
I'm a Wizards fan.
Yeah, he's a Wizards fan who's upset with his team for trying. It's like, why don't you lose? And that's just a terrible place to be as a fan or a watcher of sports, that anybody is like, oh, my team's they're so mediocre. It's terrible. I wish they would be awful.
Well, look at what happened with Brooklyn this past year. Brooklyn was competitive. Like Brooklyn, we got to like Thanksgiving, and I'm like, goodness gracious. And remember, they made that trade a year before, and they got their picks back from the Rockets, and everyone's like, we need them to be bad. All their fans want them to be bad. And then they were competitive, and then they're like, you know what? We're too competitive. We're going to trade Dennis Schroeder to the Warriors, and then we're going to trade Dorian Finney-Smith, and then we're going to be really bad. And guess what? Instead of being really bad, they wound up having the 8th pick in the draft. So
and 4-point guards.
It's like, listen, I went through it in New Jersey in 2009-10. We were 12-70. And that wasn't by design. We just had bad players, and we had a lot of injuries, and we wound up having, instead of the 1st pick in the draft, the 3rd pick in the draft. I mean, the Pistons went through that for the last 3 or 4 years, where they had like the 5th pick in the draft 3 years in a row, right? Like, so yes, it's like, I hate the system where we are rewarding teams for being bad, and then it's like. And then when the fans have this high expectation because like, well, all right, we've done everything we can to be bad, and then we get the 4th pick in the draft.
Yeah. Domonique, for the record, I'm only mad as a Wizards fan that we just decided to tank the year after Victor Wembanyama. Yeah. Like that's the one where it doesn't add up. Where it's like, it did
pick
make your
sense.
battles here.
Right. This is gonna veer me into like my labor perspective, but like the leagues often use parity or use other rationales to talk about the rules that they're trying to change and how they are trying to make the game better and more interesting and more engaging. When fundamentally what it comes down to is like lowering player costs, because they aren't really trying to create this parity. And I'm not sure that you can ever create real parity in basketball because there's so few players on the court. And it's like, if somebody has a superstar, you won't be able to compete with them until you get one.
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, you have 5 players. You have 10 players on the court at a time. It's not like you can have, the NFL, you have 11 and 11, and, or hockey even, you have, 7 or 8 here. So there is a huge, difference as far as where the NBA is and where these other leagues are.
So I do have a question on that of where these leagues are, which is just that we just talked about it from the GM's perspective.
Yeah.
But we're now a year into this, and is the NBA happy with what the apron's doing to this stuff? Because that's the other perspective on it. Like they're the other party that's really been a part of the negotiation on it.
Yeah, I mean, I sat in Las Vegas when the commissioner addressed the media, and he went through, a lot of it was expansion, but he did go through kind of like, you were in year 3 now. We're going into year 3 of the offseason, and the big question is like, is the middle class squeezed out, right? Like you hear from the player's perspective here, is the middle class. I went back and I looked at the numbers this year. And the commissioner said, hey, the data shows that it's not true. And I said, okay, well, what does the data show? And what the data showed is that for players who signed free agent contracts this summer between $4 and $20 million, their first year salary is between $4 and $20 million. So that would pertain to, I guess, the middle class. And that doesn't include rookie contracts. We throw them out the window. 81% of free agents were in that group, which is a pretty high number.
Yeah.
Last year was 76%. So you can say that it's a good number. It's getting better. Last year was worse. Teams are using their exceptions more. You could also make the counter argument, well, there's only one team that really had a cap space, which was Brooklyn. So teams were kind of forced to go out and use that more. You could say that the one rule that came into play that has really forced teams to spend or add salary is the minimum floor rule, which is you have to spend 90% of the salary cap. It used to be you had to, but there was no penalty. The penalty was basically we take the difference and we gave it back to the players. Oklahoma City did that a couple of years where basically we're $20 million below the floor. And guess what? Everybody gets a slice of that money, which was terrific. Well, that still happens. You still get a slice of that. But what happens now is that if you're below that number by the start of the season, you don't get a tax distribution back. So there are more penalties as far as going below the floor than in the past. And the players also get that distribution. So it's like they still get it, but you also have to kind of go out and spend that money, whether it be in trades or free agency.
There's a couple impacts on the star players that I'd like to find out what you think is going to happen. So my assumption is like with player empowerment to the degree that it exists and players were able to force their trade and pick their location.
Yeah.
I assume that is the ability to do that is going to go down just because trades are going to be made so much more difficult with the threat of the roster penalties of the second apron.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're looking at it like if there was no second apron, and there was always a first apron. I think people get confused about that. There was always a first apron, but like basically like the penalties were like 2 and now it's like 10. It's like there was like it was always a watered down version. If there wasn't a second apron, like who's to say LeBron could have said this summer, you know what, I want to be traded and I want to go back to Cleveland. Right? Like, so that basically goes out the window because of these rules right now, because of where Cleveland is with financially and buried in the second apron. But yeah, you're right. I mean, we're seeing it right now kind of in a live situation with Jonathan Kuminga. And it's he's a restricted free agent, and restricted free agency is a bear. And that's why we see a lot of players sign rookie extensions, because restricted free agency is not a place to be, especially when the market is not great. And Shams and Anthony Slater reported they offered him 2 for $45, which is a pretty good number for restricted free agents. There's only been in the last 3 years 3 players that have made more than $20 million per year who were restricted. And he says, well, no, I want more, and if not, I want to be signed and traded. And now you're saying, oh, wait a minute, now we got to talk about the second apron, right? Because basically Golden State's going to be hard capped at the first apron or the second apron. So yeah, I would say from a player empowerment, there is always going to be. I mean, we saw it with Jimmy Butler. Basically say, hey, I want to go to Phoenix, and Phoenix was like, I can't aggregate contracts to go out and trade for you now. Let's see if we can go find Golden State who can be a facilitator. So I do think it plays a huge role as far as players. Not saying players still can't get traded, but players getting traded to their preferred destinations.
One of the things that made it difficult to build a championship contender in a lot of cities was the max salary.
Yeah.
Just because there's players who deserve a max salary. And then there are players who are the best player on your team, so you have to give them a max salary. Yeah. And there were ways to work around it. Do we suspect that these things are going to change, or how will contracts change going forward?
Yeah, so Brian Windhorst, he has like he categorizes it. So we've got the rookie max salaries, which is the 25%. Wendy calls that the fun max, right? Like anybody, like that's like buying a stock, right? Maybe the stock hasn't grown, but you think it's going to grow really good in like 5 years from now. Like last year, like Cade Cunningham and Franz Wagner, and people are like, oh my God, why those guys aren't max players? Well, it's at a lower number. Then you get the 30% max, which is, like it could be Luka. De'Aaron Fox is another guy out there. And then you get like the dreaded 35%. That is like, and that is, we saw John Wall, Bradley Beal, guys
Not
that
fun
were
Max. Those
older.
were
Like,
not fun Maxes
I
for
know
me.
I know, and you got a no trade clause in there also.
Otto
Sorry.
Porter.
Yeah, those are not the fun Maxes, and usually
John
those are,
Nahimi.
yeah, those are the 35% guys who are old in their 30s, and that's where you get in trouble. And why Shea's contract is a good value is because even though Shea is at 35% of the cap in 2 years from now, Shea's going to be 28 years old in the first year of that extension. So you have to be careful. Like we were talking about it on NBA Today about Trae Young. And, Trae Young's extension eligible and he can get 30% of the cap. And I said, well, I'd be careful there. And I think Trae Young's a heck of a player. But it's like you just can't give away those contracts anymore that maybe you could. Like the 35%ers, which is the Supermax number, that's a tough pill to swallow. I mean, Phoenix had 3 of them. Like that. Yeah. Like that's like the doomsday. 1 you can get away with. 2, yikes. But when you have 3 of those, yikes.
I think we've always kind of thought NBA teams would build and try to gather their stars on the same timeline. Yeah. But with the point that you're making about this rookie wage situation is it seems like it would incentivize NBA teams to behave more like football teams in that we get a rookie quarterback.
Yeah.
And then so we go all in and build around him. So like Victor is never going to be cheaper. So I guess I'd be surprised if you find out you have a superstar, if the reaction isn't, our first window is today.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like similar like Cooper Flag in Dallas too.
Yeah,
like Cooper Flag on it, and then you had what else? All that everything else around him. Like Cooper's making $12-13 million, and Anthony Davis is making 50 plus. So when you have players on those contracts, you take advantage of it, right? Like it's when you have a really good quarterback who's a rookie or first year and you're on your rookie deal. Like you take advantage of that window there because it gives you the ability to add everything else. As far as whether it be in free agency, that's what where San Antonio is, where they're basically going to have next year De'Aaron Fox on I don't even know, $49 million contract, $46 million contract, and Victor Wembanyama on a $14 million contract. And even when Victor signs his rookie max, it's still going to probably be 25% of the cap, which is still really good value, unless maybe he hits one of those escalator clauses here. But yeah, that's the beauty of it when you have a first round pick who's a generational talent, and you're paying him basically a third than what your next highest player could be.
Are draft picks in general going to go up in value? Because it feels like those always are kind of thrown away. Even much of the lottery doesn't feel like people are excited to have them. But with what you were saying about how contract structures are going to change and it's easier to keep your players, will we see teams start to value their draft picks, even the lower ones, because of the lottery aspect of it?
Well, we saw Brooklyn do it, right? I mean, Brooklyn basically, it's funny. We had a production meeting the morning of the draft, and I went in there, and they said, "What are you hearing about Brooklyn?" And I talked to the Nets earlier, and they said, "Listen, we're going to probably keep all our picks," which would have been unprecedented. And I walked in there. I go, "Be prepared for Brooklyn keeping all their first round picks." And they're like, "What?" I'm like, "Listen, they look at it as value, right? Like they're rebuilding." Like they look at this as inexpensive contract, and even if only 3 out of the 4 or 3 out of the 5 work, it's still a pretty good number.
It's great.
What could happen there. So I do think there's more value as far as especially where the cost is. It's a 4-year contract. You're likely, if you really like that player, you're going to get him for another 4 years on an extension. Second round picks probably not as much because of NIL. We saw a lot of. It was reversed. I think we had like 18 or 19 freshmen that got drafted this year in the first, and then 19 4 or 5 year guys in the second round. It was like one of the older drafts because of the NIL guys going back to school. So that might certainly play a role. But I do think first round picks. Certainly we talked about Oklahoma City. You take the quality over the quantity, a quality over quantity approach. And you try to consolidate that. And if you take, if you got 4 swings at it and you land one generational guy, I think a lot of teams would do that.
Yeah. So I do want to, I just a last couple questions, but the one I was thinking is like, you're more informed on this than most people who are just talking about the NBA by like, this player good, I want him on my team type of thing. Is there something that in this discussion we've really missed that you think is like, this is important, this is going to inform us about team and player and league behavior moving forward, that's just sort of eliminated when we boil down the discussion towards, traditional team building type stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, we talked about the stretch provision earlier. I think that's going to be a trend we're going to see going forward. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just think, like, it's funny. I had an agent text me and he's like, "Hey, can you let me know how many teams have cap space next summer?" And I was like, "Well, are we taking the stretch provision into the conversation? Because I can tell you all 30, if we're going to do that." So I do think, I think we're going to see that more. I think we're going to see a cycle come back where cap space is more important than years past.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think you're seeing it with the two LA teams right now. Like, both those teams have quietly jockeyed to position for the summer, next summer, in the summer of 27. The summer of 27, if these guys don't extend, could be probably the greatest free agent class ever. Giannis, Jokic, and a 40-plus-year-old Steph Curry who could probably still play. Mitchell, Towns. Like, there is, like, this group of players could be historic. And that's why you see these two teams, like, basically saying, you know what, we're going to keep our books clean, and we're going to take we're going to be like Miami in 2010, which we haven't seen in a while. Like, the closest was Brooklyn in 2019 with Durant and Kyrie. And I think we're going to see another cycle of this where cap space becomes a priority, where in the last 4 or 5 years, it really hasn't been.
So I think the second apron is obviously seems like the story of this offseason and probably will be for the foreseeable future. Do you think that there's any chance that we get to a point that we go backwards on this, that we remove the second apron? Because I'm not sure that too many people love it, with the exception of, I guess, the owners keeping some more in their pocket.
Well, I love it because I get to teach everyone, right? I mean, I love it. Like I said, when we get new rules, it's like the Olympics, right? Every 4 years, and we get to kind of, oh man, it's hard once you have something in it. It's,
Right.
it's hard to take it back out without you giving back something, like some big concession as far as where you are. I think the apron stays as long as it shows that money continues to grow. I mean, in 2017, player salaries were at $3.3 billion. This year, we're right at $5.5 billion. So it's growing, right? It's just a matter of like where that money is being allocated to, as far as some the top level guys, and we've talked about the in between. It's interesting, like, people don't realize this, like, but when the second apron came in, like, one of the guys who was on the every and this from being with the Player Association, like, the NBA and the NFL, like, the owners make up the committees.
Mm-hmm.
And like Joe Lacob had a pretty big say in as far as some of these second apron rules, and he was one of the guys who spent a lot of money as far as the Clippers. Like, there's a reason why like 2 or 3 teams ruined it for 27 other, right? Like, that was like Brooklyn and the Clips and Golden State were like, you know what, we're just going to blow it through, and the league was like, you know what, we're going to put a stop to this here, and that's how we're going to do it.
But Joe Lacob really won in this, in that he got a number of championships, and now he's getting a big new stadium that generates a lot more revenue, and he's being forced because he has his hands tied. I gotta stay under the cap.
He can say, like, listen, I can't spend $200 million because there's rules. Right?
Yeah, or we won't be able to acquire talent. Like, it's the genius twist that the NBA and the owners and Joe Lacob has put on it.
I always find it funny, like, around the draft when teams trade cash. And why I say that is because that hard caps you at the second apron. And then it's like, well, we can't spend anymore, right? Like, this is who we are. We can't spend anymore.
I hate it.
So really, this all comes back to Domonique, who had the cap spike. The Warriors blew through everything, and now we have a second apron.
Sorry about that, Bobby. I was working at the basketball union when we decided not to smooth the major cap spike and made way for for Durant to go there, and Charlie likes to bring it up and remind me every time and say
Hey,
that.
but they'll tell you, Golden State, Bob will tell you, hey, we would have been able to create the money anyway, even without the cap spike.
There you go, Charlie. Get off my back. All right, Bobby, I appreciate you for taking the time to join us. I hope everything works out for the NBA and Charlie's team gets better, because they won't.
Debanza season. It's incoming.
Is that you play in the Eastern Conference.
There we
yes.
go. All right, Bobby. Thank you for joining us.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it, guys.
Charlie.
Thank
Thanks
you.
to all the great producers. We out.
This is the Domonique Foxworth Show.